Welcome to Essential Dynamics. I'm Derek Hudson, host of the Essential Dynamics podcast. Today I'm with my colleague Dave Kane from Unconstrained. Dave, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm excited to continue
You ready
these
to go? Yeah.
deep conversations with interesting people. And this is like my head is just full of stuff about Essential Dynamics. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but
Right.
it keeps me thinking anyway.
As long as we keep finding the simplicity on the other side of complexity, we're good.
Yeah, you know what I find about that is that it's hard. When
That's what you talk about all the time. It's supposed to be hard.
it's supposed to be hard, but when I get to the simplicity, I always say, well, why didn't we just go straight there? And I don't know how to do that. So
Yeah, but if you don't go through that complexity and you're trying to present it to someone, it's so easy to just get derailed because they'll go, "Well, what about this?" And it's like, "Well, I haven't thought through it far enough yet to deal with those, right?" So you have to go through that exercise, or it's not enduring. It won't stand up to the tests that people put it through.
yeah, I think there's a difference between simple and simplicity.
Yes, that's true.
If you think about it, like for example, I think I've quoted this before. Isaac Newton said, "Nature is simple," and it took him a long time to figure out how to explain that to us in terms of the laws of gravitation, and then they only held up for so long before we needed more because we understood more.
Well, that's a good link back to what we've been talking about with systems, right?
Yes.
We're mimicking nature with the complexity of it, and trying not to look in silos, right? So we've been there for what, 3-4 episodes now. So
Yeah. So where are we going today?
I just want to kind of wrap up this one with a bit of the practicality of it, in that we talk about how systems and flow is important, and we've gone through systems dysfunction and all the system flow piece. But there's a practicality to it out there that sort of says it's great to focus on the process rather than the outcome, but those above me and those within the organization want me to have measures on these things, right? And so it's sort of like, but I'm about the process. But yeah, you still got to have measures to it. So upwards with the governance, there's metrics and reporting, and then downwards, or not downward, but within the organization, about trying to get everyone to focus on the right thing. Measures are critical to all that. So what I'm kind of curious to explore is, can measures coexist with a focus on flow?
Well, they can, Dave, and I think they are critical. However, there are a lot of measures that can be, destructive to flow or anti-flow.
Well, because we always jump to outcomes, output, or activities.
Yeah.
Right? We did stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'll just give you an example that came up as an activity measure, and I've talked about it before. When I was at Microline, we had a customer that was using our product as a major component for their product, and their product was taking off, and so they needed more and more and more of our product, and they had no other supplier. And because we hadn't completely refined the manufacturing system, this product was hard to make. And there are a lot of steps in the process where the product could fail because it was wafer fabrication and tiny little devices. And anyway, at one point, in order to encourage us to produce more, we had a mandated number of wafers that we started every week. So that is an activity measure. That's an input measure. That's right at the front end of the process. And if we didn't start the right number of wafers, then, our customer wasn't happy. But the problem is starting them is not the same as finishing them.
Or finishing them well. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we just jammed up our system with stuff that wasn't moving, because at some point in the middle of the process, there was a constraint that limited the flow. And if you started more every week than that constraint could handle, they piled up.
Yeah.
And so the activity measure itself is not a great one. But there's some challenges with measuring the outcomes as well. And there's one of the things I wanted to mention related to this is if you don't follow the process that you have,
To get to the outcome, but you didn't follow
to get to the outcome, and then you measure the outcome, you don't really know what's happening. So, for example, let's say you don't get the outcome that you want. You don't produce enough units. The first question that management should ask, in varying places in the organization is, are you following the process? And if the answer is no, we couldn't because of this excuse or that excuse, it didn't work or whatever. Now we don't know anything. We just know we didn't achieve the outcome. We don't know what to fix. But the opposite situation is also a problem. And that is if you achieve the outcome and you don't follow the process, then you may not be able to replicate it.
Right.
You may not be able to scale it. You got one, that's great. Now can you produce 10? Can you produce, 100? Can you produce 1,000? You don't actually know. And so while the outcome is a useful measure and it's definitely what the customer is interested in, if you just focus on the outcome, you don't understand the process well enough to adapt when things either go really well and you need to make more, or they don't go well because you have some quality problem or something like that. So yeah, we need to measure in the process.
So it sounds like you need a balance. So you can't have all on outcomes or all on process, because you may get lost on the process and not. I mean, we've talked a lot about the need for that tension, right?
Yeah.
And I think having the bit of the focus on the outcomes creates a bit of that tension in the system.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're focused on outcomes. Not focused on outcomes, but your process is designed to create outcomes. And then you run the process and see if you achieve the outcomes. And then you tweak the process. But you need to understand, if you're complying with the process or not. I have been in 2 or 3 situations myself, and I have a client who very clearly shared with me, he said, every time something goes wrong and I get the phone call, my question asked, did you follow the process? The answer is, no, we didn't follow the process.
Right.
So there is some value in measuring something in the process. We'll get to that in a sec. I just wanted to talk about one more thing about the outcome, and that is this idea of variations in the outcome happening either because of a variation in the process or because of random fluctuation or external events. And it's really funny because accountants don't understand this at all, but engineers have this concept of signal to noise ratio.
Right.
And so if your sales are 105 units a day and all of a sudden you have 120, and then you go back to 105, the day after that, you don't know what's going to happen unless you understand the signal and whether that data point was a blip because someone mistakenly ordered twice as much as usual, or if that's a trend that you need to follow. And we typically don't have ways of detecting it or sort of canceling out the noise. And so if we just focus on measuring outcomes, we can always be trying to manage for something that's not actually happening.
I would agree with that. The pieces I've seen along the way, though, if you're measuring outputs, is it's not a point in time. And so if you are measuring a series of them, you can start to look at, is it an anomaly or is it a change in trend? But I kind of get where you're going with your piece, though.
Yeah, actually, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier that one of the ways I discovered this, and I am going to link it in the show notes, is this concept called the hacker's diet.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so he was a computer software developer who was stereotypical in terms of he worked long hours and didn't get any exercise and, ate junk food at his desk. And he found that his weight and his fitness and his overall well-being were not good. So he put an engineering approach to it. And one of the things that he determined is if you weigh yourself, you're sure that's a point in time, that's a data point.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on your fluid intake and other things that are going on in your body, you could vary, 2 or 3 or 4 pounds and really be the same person and have the
same health,
health level.
Yeah.
So his solution to that was to make a 10-day rolling weighted average, 10-day average. And he built a spreadsheet that you put in your weight for the day, and then you get your trend weight, which is the only one you look at. You don't look at your weight for the day, because if you eat pizza one night, wake up the next morning, you're 2 pounds heavier. Then you say, well, I'm never eating pizza again. You don't actually know if the pizza had anything to do with your weight.
Okay.
But if you track your weight over several days and make minor adjustments to the process, that trend should start to turn on you. And then you have better information. So that signal to noise ratio and that idea that we shouldn't overreact to point in time measures is pretty solid.
Also because, you want to be able to determine what the cause of that was. And if you're not measuring your process or your system, you're not going to know whether it was, something you can tweak or change or something out of your control.
Yeah. So let's talk about that sort of in process measures. And there's one, sort of classic example, and that's the life insurance salesman. No one wants to think about the need for life insurance, and they put off talking about it. But if you get approached by someone and they sit down and explain it to you, you might buy it. So any technology, I guess, but maybe the telephone, the life insurance salesperson would just have to make cold calls door to door or on the phone and try and find somebody to talk to. And they had ratios. If you do this many cold calls, you'll get this many meetings. You have this many meetings, you'll get this many leads. And if you have worked those leads, at some point you'll get a sale. And there's no replacing the cold calls in the pipeline, in the funnel. And so you can measure all those steps and eventually start to understand the relationship. And so typically, I think in that process, when people didn't do well, they weren't following the process. They weren't putting in the numbers that they needed to in the stage of starting with the cold calls. And we don't like that, because we'd rather figure out the shortcut.
Everybody's now is how can I hack this? How can I get there quicker?
Yeah. So there's that one. And then the other one, which I don't understand as well, which would be really fun. And if Bryn bursts in here, it's fine, because it's the situation in high performance sports where the outcome of a particular game can depend on a bunch of factors. Good coaches focus on the process and building the team into the process. And so then you measure in process measures, like in hockey, grade A scoring chances, and digging the puck out of the corner and things like that. And then you've got something to work with your team. I think, the movie Moneyball and that concept that there's a way to win baseball games based on getting people on base. And there are things that you need to do to get people on base. And if you run the system that way, then you're likely to do well. And if you're betting your system on a high performance, high paid athlete, and you don't understand the system, you might not get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't seen a ton of that in business. Now there's like a subset where I have seen it is in highly controlled, like quality assured manufacturing
almost
process.
Production environments.
Yeah. So you can control tons of variables and you measure tons of things. And if something is out of spec, you can push the red button and chase down the variation in the machine and get things running back again. And and there's a lot that we can learn from manufacturing. The problem is that so much of what we do is not manufacturing, and it's hard to fit into manufacturing. So I think at this point we're probably in the learning mode of this particular episode. So what do we need to learn?
So I'm sort of translating that. Okay, production is easier because you kind of see the widgets moving along. But if I'm trying to figure out how to reflect something that looks at the health of the system and the flow of the system, I'm sort of curious to get your thoughts on how do you do that, and do you take the same approach of with other measures of trying to define what good looks like and then set expectations and measure going forward like you would other metrics? Or like, how do you land on what you want to communicate to say, yeah, look, my system is healthy, therefore I should get these outcomes in time, because you're trying to convince your board or others that we need to invest and focus on these things. And I haven't quite, and I don't want to get into like specific metrics you've used, but how would you approach trying to land on what the right ones are? Because when it's not obvious.
Well, let's talk about flow for a second. So we talk about system flow, and then there's like a physical flow in a production process, and we know that flow is limited. In a stable system, flow is limited by one constraint. If you have a few constraints that have capacity that's similar, then the actual constraint at any point in time can be one or the other of those, and it can bounce around. You can get a little bit more chaotic. But if you've at least identified the constraint that you want to be the constraint, then you work on giving everything else more capacity. So then what that creates is the opportunity to manage flow by looking at one resource in the system. And so then there's some very simple things that you can measure. What's its capacity in terms of like production per hour or per unit of time? What's its available uptime? Are we running a shift for 8 hours? Is 24 hours? And, is there maintenance breaks and stuff like that? What do we, what's the actual utilization compared to the potential? And then when we look at what flows through that, and the best thing to look at is the flow of value. Mm-hmm. So what's the value add that we can create in an hour or a day based on what's going through this constrained part of the system, or sometimes we call it a control point. So then if you want to improve it, you increase the available time, increase the flow rate through, and then you optimize the mix of what's going through. And that would mean, higher value add things get priority. And how many times have we been in a situation where we've been either a participant or a customer, and something in front of us is taking a long time, and we don't think that's as high a value as another thing, whether that's us being served as a customer or not. And those things, though, I don't think they tend to be looked at very much. So you can measure those things, but we're typically stuck with measuring the financial impact of that in a month, and we usually get that information 1 or 2 or 3 weeks after it happened.
Right. Okay, that's good. That's making a lot of sense, because I'm reflecting back to when we were talking about flow and we're using the river analogy, and how to get the flow moving, we kind of constricted a bit. And so you're focusing in on the constraint or the bottleneck or the control point that you're talking about, while also looking at what is flowing through that river and prioritizing stuff in there. That's not really the same as focusing on the driver, is it? Because this is more of a constraint conversation and the mix and the prioritization of what's going through, as opposed to measuring and monitoring the driver in the process. Well,
the driver creates the demand in one sense, or it maybe creates the level of energy at which things flow through the system. And so it's relevant, but once the driver exceeds the constraint, you get more out if you deal with the constraint. But I think we've all been in situations where the pipeline's dry, and you can do all the management of the process that you want. You need an injection in the system of energy or demand or capacity, something like that.
You need your measures up on the sales and the funnel side. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, for sure. But when you have demand, then there's not that many things you have to look at, I guess is what I'm saying, even in a complex system. Stabilize it by focusing on one point as being the control point. Typically, it's best if that's the most expensive or intricate part of the process, because you want to focus on that anyway. And then you're looking at, is it working? Are we working on the right stuff? Are we getting quality out the other end? Because any time lost in the constraint is lost to the system forever. Mm-hmm. Whereas upstream and downstream, you can have a little buffer, and you can work on stuff when the constraint's not working. So there's ways to measure that, and I don't think that's the purpose of this podcast is to
we don't
speak about the details of everyone. But the principle is that to have flow, we have to look at where it's constrained, making sure that's flowing as much of the time available as possible. That could we increase the capacity in some other way? Turn up the juice, and then is the mix of things going through the right mix? And so you think of the idea of emergency room triage. Some conditions could actually be fixed in 12 or 24 or 48 hours, and the person would be just as fine, except maybe inconvenienced. Other conditions, if they're not dealt with in minutes, you don't get to keep playing.
Yeah, this is actually very helpful. So it sort of got me a bit clearer. And I think the other takeaway I'm drawing from processing this is also it's focusing in on the right things and getting the measures on these things, as opposed to an overwhelming number of measures that get this and everything else. Because what I find a lot of times is, well, I guess maybe I should clarify, there's a difference between measurement for the purpose of reporting, which is to me a lot more required, and just is all these things that you're expected to report on, as opposed to measurement for the purpose of making the right decisions, measurement for managing, right? And so I think what you're clear on here is measure the right things. Don't distract yourself with too many other things, because I feel quite often that metrics, measurement inadvertently stall the flow. You focus on too many things, the wrong things.
Dave, there's a ton of what you just said. So we don't want measurements to be a distraction, because our attention is, the ultimate resource that we have. We can't get more of it. And you want to make sure that the measurement is used to run the system. So I have been the guy at corporate asking for the information, and I can tell you this. If the information they send to me is used in the operations, it's current, it's good, I can rely on it. If it's not used in the operations, if it's just tallied up for a corporate report, there's no self-correcting mechanism in there. Right. If it's garbage, then no one knows, because they don't do anything with it except send it up to corporate. But if the system says there's 8 items in the bin, and you go to the bin because there's a customer waiting for it and there's no items in the bin, then you correct that, and that system gets tight, so you can rely on the numbers that say what's in the bin if you're using it. That's actually the specific example, I think, where I learned that. So as a corporate governor or executive, I would rather that the measurement system was designed to help run the system. And then just, send me a copy, send me the weekly summary. I can trust that stuff. If it's made up garbage for corporate, it's garbage.
Yeah, and I would sort of add to that. There's some dynamic adaptation almost that you want to expect of. It's not the same metrics we've had or the same measures we've had for the past 3 years. It's if you're measuring your process and your flow, there's a consistency there, but there's also the willingness to adapt as you're learning and you're improving your process. Start measuring other things, or as your constraint evolves, you measure in a different way.
Well, yeah, and if you can stabilize something down to, that it's always within tolerance, then that's probably not the thing to focus your management attention on.
Okay, I like that. I mean, a bit different conversation today. It's a little bit more on I guess it's the accountant and me coming out, but I think that's helpful because the questions I keep running into are along that sort of way of, yeah, but how do I show it? So I think this has been quite helpful for me. Thanks.
Well, it is very relevant in the business world that we're talking about. But as I said, I'll put notes to the hacker's diet, and there's nobody that can't use this to improve other aspects of their lives. Well, thanks very much, Dave, and thanks, Bryn Griffiths, for supporting us from the back. Dave and I are with Unconstrained, and you can find us at getunconstrained.com. Very interested in continuing the conversation on essential dynamics and how it can help us run our organizations and improve our lives. And until next time, consider your quest.